for Team Dominaticus, word of Latin origin. And in the top left-hand side, it is Spirit for Kaisi Gaming. That is Kaisi, right? Not actually, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't try to guess on some things, you know. You get the pronunciation a little bit wrong and you're like, how dare you pronounce a word from a language you don't speak incorrectly? You absolute monster. You know, cats, we get that one a lot.
Yes, indeed. And yeah, we're all mispronouncing Jagannatha, I think, but no one cares about that one because there's not enough Indian people watching StarCraft to correct us.
I'm just going to be real with you, cats. I wouldn't make fun of somebody who is learning English and said a word differently than I would for saying it differently than me, or if they didn't speak English at all. So I don't ask for too much more than a similar bit of, I guess, the benefit of the doubt, as it were. As Hellraiser's probe gets in, we're going to see that early scout tasing these poor SCVs and coming out. We'll wait for the shields to regen, can go back in if he wants, but nothing really crazy to start here from Spirit. Looks like it's just going to be a standard Reaper expand setup. And Hellraiser, on the other hand, he goes cybernetic score before Nexus. Sometimes you'll see that Nexus a little bit faster, especially on the maps where you can be defensive. But it might be a sign that with this probe harass that he's been doing, that he's hoping he can get an adept over, that maybe one taps an SCV that's left out there, or even maybe a little bit of stalker pressure and just try and, you know, really punish him for having that Reaper if he doesn't get a bunker quickly.
Yeah, very interesting that he backs away, I guess, knowing that the Reaper is bound to come out sometime soon, but he had a little bit more time left. So I'm surprised he didn't at least try to get the SCV, but maybe that's a rookie mistake that I would make. He knows better not to fall into. The Reaper will be scouting for potential proxies, and that is, I guess, one of the advantages of leaving early with the probe, right? Is it doesn't get tracked, and now your opponent has to be thinking, where did it go?
Yeah, and that's a terrifying feeling sometimes. I don't even mind when you like see the SCV that pushes the probe away, just stick on it a little so the Reaper can get vision. Because otherwise you do this. You're looking for proxies. He's making sure that, while, you know, because the worst case scenario is the Reaper gets to their base and you see that there's pretty much nothing. Like, okay, well, I don't know where the proxy is. Stargate's probably already done or finishing. So suddenly you have to find that. Then, you know, is it a proxy robo? Is it a second proxy gateway? We see a lot of different builds like that. So you need to get that information as early as you can. Reaper going through that mineral line does not get blocked in quite, but the shade should finish. And yeah, he's not going to survive that one. But at the very least, Spirit does see it is a Stargate opening. So he's not going to be worried about too much. I don't really think this is something that scares you as a Terran, unless your entire strategy was like, you know, I'm going to do a mine drop 100% and nothing else, no other option. Then the Phoenix can do a pretty decent job of keeping a medevac awake and lift up the mines before they burrow. But I think the last thing you want to do is just move out with like 1 or 2 units where the Phoenix can pick you off. So we'll probably see him chill. Maybe if he wants to do something with his Cyclone, he'll get like 6 or so Marines and keep them all together. So it's not too easy.
Yeah, I was going to say, interestingly, he had already started the tech lab on the factory. And I feel like Cyclones is the type of units that don't stack up well against Phoenix. But all that said, Hellraiser, and I love this. I was going to say Hellraiser stopped making Phoenix, but as soon as he sees that there is a tech lab on the factory, he anticipates, well, this has to be a Cyclone. Or I guess it could be a tank, but that would be weird seeing as he scouted Stargate. So anticipate Cyclone starts or restarts Phoenix production. I love it.
Yeah, and Viking as a follow-up to this is something that we actually do see a decent bit just for the zoning potential, because sometimes those Phoenix just go in and out. The range on the Viking with the Cyclone support makes it quite a bit tricky. Spirit's got a Marine that's been checking the third. I love this, by the way, because it's really, really normal for a Protoss in a macro game if they're not going to attack you. It's very normal for the Protoss to get the third base well advanced of the Terran. So just by having something there that can look for it will basically tell you whether or not the Protoss is going to get aggressive anytime soon. Because if they don't take that third base, you're going to start asking, okay, well, are they just pumping out a bunch of gateways? Is it going to be a huge attack? Or are they being like so greedy that they don't feel comfortable with that? But the Marine walks over to the natural as a probe passes by. So whether he was looking at that or not is definitely going to matter, because sometimes with these early tank openers, with how late the extra barracks are, it's more for those big pushes. But he has a third command center that's done, so it doesn't really feel like he's gonna, you know, go all in or anything like that.
Yeah, very interesting. And yeah, he does give away the Marine at a kind of an awkward time. And obviously he wasn't looking on his screen, I think, fair to say, because otherwise he wouldn't have run into the Adepts. But he was definitely potentially he had the option, not definitely, rather he could have been looking at the minimap, right? Like, and if you see a dot heading in that direction, it's likely to take a Nexus at this point in the game. So maybe he has gathered the information enough to know that his opponent is taking that third. He is doing the same thing.
So. There is something we have to point out, though, because we're going to get roasted alive since we haven't said the words out loud, cats. But yes, there is no warp gate. It's a Protoss mech style Hellraiser. This is not the first time that we've seen him do this, but I guess it is really important to mention. He doesn't have warp gate, so it's going to be pure off the robo, off the Stargates, relying on the power units. The Phoenix are his anti-air, so we get a little bit more insight into the opening. Since he was never going to get warp gate, obviously he needed some form of anti-air no matter what, just in case anything came over, because nothing out of the robotics facility kills air units, cats. So he's gotta check off all the boxes. Get him thermal lance, get him +1 range, and these games are generally very stressful because it's not super common for Protoss to do this. Maybe it's a little bit more nowadays. Maybe if you play Hellraiser, you expect it, but definitely unorthodox PvT. But on this map where you can be very defensive easily, I think it actually does make a pretty good amount of sense.
It does make a pretty good amount of sense. It does give a little bit of information as well. The only unit that can really be aggressive easily with this type of composition out on the map is going to be this Phoenix, because if you try to be aggressive early on and you get reset, then you just die, right? Because your production's just not there. You don't have the capabilities to kind of warp in a bunch of cheaper units to withhold incoming attacks and the likes. Your production is very limited, and building up these units, like building up mech for the Terran player, will take a while. So you get reset, you're out of position or too close to your base, and then you'll just die. So the Phoenix are gonna have to try to find what they can. I would love to see in response from Soul or from Spirit to try and maybe take a fourth base a little bit faster, or try to tech up a little bit faster. I would love to see that production filled up with whatever he wants to get, because identifying this, and if he has identified this, he should know that he has a timing where his opponent's not going to be aggressive.
Yeah, there's definitely a vulnerability window, because the strongest part of this type of composition comes to the robo units. Unless you can get up to 4 or 5 bases, and then we see that money turn into carriers with like upgrades down the line. There is a fleet beacon, of course. You kind of just, you need to have disruptors for the bio, colossi for the bio. The Phoenix, they're not going to stop a Marine Marauder attack. They're not going to be able to defend that. And coming right up front, I love this. Manages to get a cancel on the base very quickly. We see the colossi being frustratingly. Oh, well, how about that? Big mines onto the Phoenix. I was going to say, you know, the colossi, they're going to be the ones that are zoning these units away, but they're slow. And you only have so many of the colossi. The Tempests are not going to be able to defend. The Phoenix won't be able to defend. We saw that immediately with the mines too. So you don't even have cheap units to really throw away into the mines if you think about it, right? Because it's not like he's going to warp in a bunch of zealots and just run them through to eat the shots. He kind of has to use expensive units to tank those if he wants to clear them.
Now with the option of the disruptors and the range of the colossi and the Tempest, if he can have good vision, that's another option that he can use to clear those. But you're completely right. I mean, there aren't throwaway units in this composition. Rambis and the likes are going to be increasingly less likely. Like I was saying earlier, the Phoenixes are the only units that really have a chance to stay out on the map and try to make some harassment happen. But if the Protoss builds up a 200 army of this type of style, it will be very difficult for the Terran to stop. So we might be witnessing somewhat of a one-punch-man type situation, as now Soul is trying to make something happen on the other side of the map, trying to cause chaos on the side of Hellraiser, but at the expense of really expanding faster or doing a little bit something, you know, like his own transition maybe into battle cruisers. You were talking about yesterday how battle cruisers are a great answer to these capital ships from the Protoss side of things. And instead, Soul seems to kind of just be playing his normal game, which is a little bit worrisome for me.
Yeah, we see this weakness in almost every Terran that goes against these kinds of builds, because generally, and it even happened to Clem, where it just boils down to just the way the Terran players are with their strategies, mostly very stubborn, especially in this matchup. They're not going to try and mix things up too much. They're not going to try and say, okay, you're doing an arms race strategy, I'm going to do an arms race strategy. You still typically see people go, okay, I'm going to try and do this with Marines, Marauders, Vikings, and Ghosts. And then the carrier count gets too high. You realize that you actually don't have 100 Marines like you thought your army. You think, oh, I've got a bunch of Marines, I'm fine. But in reality, it's like 24 Marines. Not, you know, he's got 30 supply of Marauders. So these are the kinds of things that Down the line, you take 1 or 2 bad fights. Suddenly, that anti-air isn't really there. The Vikings, they have low hit point count, and I'm going to agree with you. Of course, battle cruisers are incredible against this, but they cost more than carriers and take longer to build. So if you want to make that transition, you kind of have to get the jump on the Protoss. It would take a very long time and a whole lot of money to make that transition, and that's, I think, the biggest reason why we don't see it. So he's just going to go for the big drop, hits the natural expansion, and this is the other way you do it. You play that regular battle style.
No.
Move command.
Yeah, F2. F2 is what that was. He probably clicked F2 and clicked on the other side of the map onto the Nexus. So doing a lot of damage on this side. Does get rid of the fleet beacon eventually. But yeah, again, this type of approach, and the reason why I don't like it so much for Soul, even though it might be working out here with the carriers actually exposed and a lot of Vikings joining in on the fight, but without the Marines supporting here, the interceptors are going to be free to kind of continue to be produced. They're not going to be falling very quickly, and with that, the carriers are going to end up kind of rejecting that army on the other side of the map. But yeah, normally, like when we're talking about PvT, like there's going to be less static defense, there's going to be like Zealot run-bys, there's going to be more chaos, there's going to be war prisms on the other side of the map, and all of those are openings to where both players have to spread their attention across the map. Here, Hellraiser says, this is my 4 bases, and for Soul to find room to do damage as he just did is kind of a blessing, to be honest, right? Like, oh my god, and he continues to find damage. I mean, you have to be in 2 locations if you're Hellraiser, and just not being in one of those 2 locations is an oversight from his part that I don't think he would be granted more often than not if you're Spirit, like to try and out multitask a Protoss that is purely focusing on the defense. And in spite of all this, Hellraiser is still ahead in supply.
Yeah, well, the thing is, there's a right way to play StarCraft, but that's pretty much entirely determined by everybody's perception of how everybody else plays. So you think to yourself, he's doing something that 99% of players wouldn't do. This has to be terrible. Right. And yet, he's managed to get up to 4 bases. He has a very well upgraded army. He has an incredibly valuable army value when you look at the setup that he has. A huge amount of gas involved with this. He's invested in incredibly cost-effective units. So does he have the ability to kill a few SCVs? No. But if Spirit, keeps a very well-rounded composition, he should just die to the big air army once it gets large enough, because a lot of these units are going to struggle to fight in low numbers against the full brunt of, you get to 80+ interceptors. And again, we're looking at 27 Marines as the army comp. Vikings are not good against carriers, so you're not going to be able to deal with them using those. You need something else. A fusion core is being made, and a lot of extra starports. This is what I like to see. Well, and I guess if he goes long enough, if he gets enough bases, that'll be fine. But Hellraiser is about to max out on this comp, so I think the mistake here from the Protoss side of things would be if he doesn't try and force the issues soon. Yeah. If you let the Terran transition into battle cruisers and they match your carrier count, you're super dead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, we were anticipating this. We were talking about how from the beginning, it's not like I've watched a lot of this style take place, but it's obvious, right? Like, what are you going to attack with earlier than this? Because if you attack with a few units and you get reset without Warp Gate, you're just dead. So, like, you can't attack simply as a Protoss player. The strategy that Hellraiser is doing is consistent with itself. Here's the timing that you were talking about. He's going to push with it. And I quite honestly don't know what Spirit can do from this position. Not to say that I don't think that Spirit could have done something to prevent being in this position in the first place. I think that there's many things that he could have done. And none of those things, I would think, is just running headfirst into a turtling, meching Protoss.
Well, yeah, it's like you'd like to try to force the base trade and make him recall early on, but this is actually the best thing that Hellraiser could have done. Your opponent's still playing this very balanced economy. The Vikings are slowly trading a couple of the carriers, but they all die in that process, and he's right on top of the production. GG, well played. I mean, this one, I feel like I actually did a pretty good job of laying this one out. I'm sure it will be dismissed or hand-waved as balance wine, but the reality is he played a Grady style. There was no real punishment, so to speak, that came from the side of Spirit. And yeah, a well-balanced Terran bio army does not actually beat maxed out carriers. Sorry, guys, that's the way it is. If you want to build 100 Marines and split them against the disruptors, that can work. But 27 Marines? Not a chance.
Yeah, and towards the end of the game, it seemed like Spirit was maybe figuring out a little bit more of what he could have done earlier. I mean, we see 3 CCs that are in mining that are dropped across the map. Like, why didn't you do that as soon as you identified that your opponent was turtling until they were going to be maxed, right? Because then you have that economy kicking in a lot earlier. Then maybe if you have that kind of economy, maybe then you can play a throwaway type bio style or something like that, even if it doesn't match up well. But if you're just trying to run on head first with the same type of economy, with the same type of game plan, and I think you pointed this out too, and at the risk of offending a couple of Terran players in the chat, yeah, Terran players do tend to be a little bit stubborn in their build orders oftentimes, and I think that has to do a lot with the design of the race, right? Like Terran is a race that really benefits from structure. It's a race that really benefits from, because you can only produce one unit from.
Well, there's definitely a bit of hubris that plays into going against a guy that doesn't research Warp Gate and building 3 Marauders at a time for your harass. Like it's not like it would have been impossible for him to try and maybe put some of the starports on the tech labs that he already build reactors with those other barracks, because there wasn't storm, it was just disruptors. But yeah, that's pretty much where I was just trying to say is, you know, even with the very clear path that Hellraiser was taking, Spirit was he went into it just being like, yeah, I'm gonna do all the normal stuff that I would do against any other Protoss, which it is not gonna work on him, especially a map like Romanticide, where you can be very defensive without as much risk as, like, you know, it's not Lightshade. Your third base isn't way out there waiting to get jumped on.
Yeah, but no, I completely agree with you. I mean, and again, that is kind of the thing with Terran, right? Like, you drop a factory, you put a tech lab on it, there's all of a sudden you're constrained to a few units that you can make, very few units that you can make from that factory. Same goes for every Terran building. So making those switches is a lot harder than for a Zerg that just has larva laying around and you're like, oh, I'm just gonna make one building, and off of that one building I can make unlimited of whatever unit that building provides me the option to make, right? So it's a lot easier, I'm saying, for Zerg to be adaptive than it is for Terran, but games like this call for adaptation, and you have to break away from that mindset of, you know, of like, yeah, I'm gonna execute my build order that I'm ready to do. You have to somehow identify and give credit to your opponent and the strategy that they're employing, that it's not necessarily bad, or maybe it is bad, but only bad in so long as you exploit it, right? If you're just gonna let them do whatever they want and you're not gonna adapt at all, then this is gonna happen. And I really hope that Hellraiser does the exact same thing, just to see if Spirit is willing to do something different. Because if he's not, I'm pretty sure this is a 2-0.
I'd be shocked if he tried the exact same thing on 2000 Atmospheres. Sure, but again, if it turns into a situation where Spirit's like, okay, I'm gonna just maybe try to do 1 or 2 more early attacks, then that's still something to keep our eyes on, because he built a couple of Immortals out of the early Robo Bay that he had, or the Robo Facility rather, and we did of course have him build a bunch of Phoenix to start things off. So you're like, what's the weakness of an opening like that, right? Well, if you try to go with just a handful of Marines at the start, yeah, Phoenix can run out of energy. How many Marines can you realistically have in that early game phase? So what else are you going to do? Like Cyclones? Well, the Phoenix deal with those very easily. If you try to go for a Liberator, he already has, you know, the Phoenix are fast. They're going to catch that. So he's kind of going for a sort of catch-all defensive start with that setup. And then basically being like, yeah, I don't have a mid-game to harass you with, but I'm just trying to turtle. So I would be very surprised and impressed if he tried to pull that off a second time here against this man in the bottom left, our red Terran player. He is Spirit.
Yeah, and you're completely right. I mean, the map also plays a big part. At the top left-hand side or right-hand side of 2000 Atmospheres, it is the blue Protoss player for Dominaticus, Hellraiser. And yeah, I mean, this is a much more wide open map. There's an extra base to bite for. I mean, their bases are further apart, so, you know, it's not as easy to defend the bases as Romanticide is. And for that reason, like, the mech Protoss style is going to be a lot weaker on this map, and Bio can more easily exploit the kind of the gaps in between army or defensive setups, right? So yeah, for sure, less likely, but I hope that we go on to something like Blackburn or something like that, and we see that again if there is a third game.
For sure. And I honestly, another fun part about whenever we get to see strategies or weird stuff like this is everybody that's watching gets excited. The conversation around Warpgate. You know, is it really? And Cats, just I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm just gonna say it. That people are like, is it really 50-50 too much to get Warpgate? He attacked with +3. He had a maxed out carrier army. The Cybernetics Core researches the upgrades. Warpgate does not take like 20 seconds to research. It's not like you just pay for it and you get it instantly. It's not a direct strike upgrade. So if you want to pump out +1 air as soon as your cyber core's done and get a fleet beacon as your +1 finishes, then yes, the time that you save off that's what allows that timing to be as sharp as it is. Because especially if you're leaning on carriers, they're one of the units that benefit the most in StarCraft from attack upgrades. Interceptors shoot twice, they do low damage, but they shoot quickly. You have 8 interceptors per carrier. Every teeny little point of damage adds up so quickly. So if you can hit that timing and you can build that army, I think the only mistake Hellraiser could have made that first game with that way that everything went down would have been to just not attack. But if you make that attack happen as that upgrade completes, then of course it's worth it. Clearly the whole strategy was planned around skipping Warp Gate, dumping all his money into expensive units, and just pushing with a well-upgraded late-game army way earlier than he'd have any right to normally build it. And, well, that's what makes him look like a genius in that game. We're not having that this time, though, because there's the Warp Gate, unless he's trying to bait an SCV or Reaper Scout into seeing it.
Yeah, most definitely agreed. I mean, it's all about the time. I mean, look at how slow Warp Gate is going to research. So that's definitely going to play a part. I think that there is maybe room for Warp Gate much later in the game, or whenever you're hitting your timing and you don't need the upgrades anymore. Maybe you can add extra gateways just to make sure that you can flood as reinforcing units, because it's so difficult to reinforce with an army like that, for example, or just to stay alive on the counter offense. In a much later game, you can add gateways, but even then, I mean, you're not going to really have good upgrades for your ground force. So yeah, I mean, I like the approach from Hellraiser. I think that he did fantastic. And yeah, a very different game this time around. And I completely agree with you also. I like talking about stuff like this. I like it when players mix things up, because then you're all of a sudden theory crafting it. Like for me, that's the most exciting, the most fun thing about casting or playing StarCraft, or about talking StarCraft with players, for example, is figuring stuff out. And a lot of StarCraft has been so figured out, and there's a beauty in watching that unfold and the mastery that it takes. But the creative aspects and the creative solutions, to me, is still, it's why I fall in love with this game.
Yeah. How often do we see Terran players throw out the random Marine that goes around the outside of the map to avoid getting killed so we can check if there's a third base or not, right? I love stuff like that. And the more time that goes by, especially without patches to the game, the more we should see players that do, kind of off the beaten path type of strategies or builds. They should have more success, because if things aren't being changed and they can iron out the weaknesses of those strategies, sometimes the strength is in that weakness, where you're like, okay, he can't send zealots to harass, he can't warp in DTs to harass. Yes, he has more money to build what he's trying to build for this timing that he's trying to hit. So I completely agree with you. When we get to see these kinds of strategies, which should only pop up more and more as the years go by, it's what keeps things fresh and interesting. And I do enjoy getting to see a meme build here and there. And it's not like he's not going to still utilize some of the features of that strategy. He's opened with the Phoenix. He's got an Oracle too, so he can kind of deal with any sort of early harass that would come his way. But he's still going to have that more normal setup: go for charge, get armor upgrades, use Warp Gate. And the best part about it is you see the Phoenix on Spirit's side, and you do have to ask yourself, am I against the same thing from the last game? It doesn't matter if you are or if you're not. If you have to think, every bit of your energy that's spent trying to make a decision is going to be an advantage for your opponent. Because, when both people do meta builds, most of the part, it's a lot of muscle memory and boils down more to mechanics than anything else. Once strategy actually gets involved, things get funky quickly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, mechanics are basically muscle memory, right? If you're uninterrupted, you're going to execute as well as you can. The moment that you have to start thinking in game, the moment things can really go array. And yeah, I love that. Now we're playing a series, right? Like, and that is also the beauty of tournaments like this, where you don't just see a map played out and like players doing their ladder build that they do against everyone, but rather a series planned out. And Hellraiser, being the very cerebral player that he is playing to the series. He is playing to his reputation. He is playing to what he just did. Like, he's playing to the information that he has given Soul in the previous game. And yeah, it's up to Soul to kind of adapt. A player that I think of as much more rigid than Hellraiser.
I love everything you just said. And you know what? I'll serve up the dunk for both of us here. What's different about this game versus last game? He has 2 tech labbed barracks and 1 reactor at the start. How many Marauders does he have right now, Cats?
0.
He's starting to build them, but how many did he build for the first 6 minutes of the game? None, even with 2 tech labs, because he's thinking he was, at the very least, had to consider the possibility that the Marauders would end up being mostly useless. So invested more into the Marines early on, it's already one of those small little things where you could say if the first game hadn't gone the way it had, he probably would have tried to balance it out a little bit more in the early phase.
Most definitely. The Templar Archives will almost be finished now for Hellraiser, and that's going to be good. I would love to see Storm being researched right away, seeing as the number of Marines that you've just been alluding to has been there. 2 Templars being worked in before the research of Storm, and they will actually be morphed into an Archon, which is a little bit surprising to me, but kind of consistent as well with the charge that he has already gotten. So he will be opting for a Robo Bay. It looks like as a sort of source of AoE, also consistent with the Phoenix will be the Colossi, as they kind of overlap in the air and the Phoenix can protect them against Vikings and the likes.
Yeah, and the cool part about it is the way that he's done it in this game too. He still has access to Stalkers. He's got a ton of charged Zealots that'll make it very difficult to try and dive on the Colossi. I think the only, really, if there's any weakness, it's that there's a bit of a windup on the Robo Bay side of things. It's going to be relying a lot on just a big gateway army to defend if Spirit does push all the way across, but his air army has done a decent job of forcing. He's forced a stem or 2. He's been baiting him around. Oh, mines are going to burrow in the third base, though. These are armory mines, so they'll stay cloaked after the shots. Gets 5 probes with the first one. And those Phoenix trying to keep the army away. Well, they're not at home to defend, so good job capitalizing on that little window for Spirit.
Yeah, and it was only 2 mines, and this is a very interesting move, for example, like one that I look at and I am trying to evaluate, like, should you just drop both mines in the same location if you notice your opponent's not paying attention to it? But hey, there's a big attack coming, so save that thought for later, as Soul or Spirit is going to do a great job of kiting back and killing a lot of these cells before they do too much. The sentry will try and get a force field off, and this mine is going to go off again. Nate, how many probes? Just 3.
Just 3. Don't know if he got a good target fire on that one, but again, you know, that's the strength of Widow Mines, right? Especially if your opponent doesn't immediately deal with them, they just generate tons of value over time, staying cloaked with that armory. Just another good reason to prioritize those upgrades when you're playing bio. Have the extra sustain on those. Phoenix are going to come over one more time. The mines are going to mostly track the shots on the Phoenix. The rest of the Gateway army is still there, but there's not really a lot of Zealots mixed into this anymore. I think the best thing for Hellraiser right now is actually almost a little over micro from Spirit, because the Medivacs haven't stopped to actually heal this bio, and he's stemmed a few times, so it makes his army a little vulnerable, but there's still so much damage output with this, and those EMPs. He is continuing to take some pretty nice trades, and I think this base is still in huge danger because the 3 mines are still alive in front of this army, and maybe that first one drags on the bio, but okay, he's going to clear out the other 2 before they go off again. Lifesaver,
that Colossus. I thought that Hellraiser might have been in a lot of trouble had that Colossus not shown up. Good micro from Spirit all in all. Like, yeah, the Medivacs weren't always doing the damage, but for the most part, making great use of his stem. Very decisive, very good on the target firing onto the Immortal. Good on the dragging the mines onto the Zealots early on in the fight. And this is a move that I also like. There's not that much army. There is Blink available, but it's still not an easy Blink. We've seen it whiff just earlier in the... I was going to say earlier in the broadcast, because the broadcast yesterday was so long that it seemed like it extended to today. But no, it seems like Spirit is going to get chased out. There's enough Medivacs that he can load up most things. He's trying to target fire the Stalker so that he can get out without any losses, but instead will actually go for the Nexus and will end up getting it.
That's such a weird fight that Hellraiser just took, because he warped in Zealots in his main to defend and had most of the Stalkers at the third protecting that base. And he'll come over here and get this Medivac. But Cats, I was going to say, because he worked in Zealots, he got choked up, and he was able to kill most of them, since he has a very Marine heavy army, right? And goes get that bonus damage versus the light units. So by warping in Zealots to defend inside of the main base, he kind of choked himself up and made that Nexus even easier to kill. Little bit questionable there, as the anti-air, of course, means these Medivacs can keep flying around. But the watchtower on the left, Hellraiser's Zealot abandons post as he sees another attack coming. So we're going to get to that classic Terran trying to hit you with an army on each side. There's no Medivacs with this one just yet. I think they're just joining.
Yeah. And just please back away those Medivacs. I mean, like, yeah, you have 2 Medivacs or nearly 2 Medivacs full, and you think, okay, maybe I can get back in there. And it's not a terrible thought from that perspective, but it's mostly ghosts. They're not really going to kill buildings or pylons very easily. They're extremely expensive, and they have most of their utility together with the army for those EMPs. So yeah, now this little squad is going to kind of, the specialists are going to reunite with the brunt of his army, and they become a lot stronger this way.
Yeah, this full army together is really nice, and I do appreciate and enjoy that Spirit has, you know, since this game took more the course of a normal Protoss versus Terran, he's actually still got the Marauders back in with this army. They are useful in this against this type of composition. They are going to do a lot of work. The shield battery gets overcharged, but it's actually not quite in range of that Colossus at the front. So one does get picked off, but the Stalkers trim the fat on most of the Vikings. Just 3 Vikings for 3 Colossi. That gets a little bit scary. Okay, 3 more Vikings are going to show up, and yeah, the terrain will make it a little bit tougher to blink across. So he does get one of the Vikings, but he trades out. These Stalkers are not cheap units to trade away. They're not the ones that you're like, oh yeah, I can just lose 3 or 4 Stalkers every fight. Maybe Zealots you can, but Stalkers do not come cheap, cats.
Very much so. There's only 1 sentry remaining as well. It doesn't have enough energy for Guardian Shield, much less to use additional force fields or something like that. So the complexity of the army of Hellraiser is kind of low to where Spirit will have an easier time outmaneuvering. Nice blink there to kind of shield himself from the fire of an unannounced mine. And yeah, Spirit is still going to look for openings here with a medevac moving towards the south to maybe head up north and find the 4th base or 3rd base, whichever one that is of Hellraiser exposed. We'll see if that's possible, as Liberator range, as Niall points out, is being researched as well, and 4 Liberators at a time.
Yeah, that's big. 4 Liberators at a time, especially with advanced ballistics. Huge amount of firepower. +2 just starts now as well for the Libs, which will give you that 2-shot on most of the Protoss ground units. Very, very important upgrade. The Prism, though, look at this. Not only do Zealots get into the 3rd, but that Prism slips back behind the main. I do believe the Vikings are headed towards it. One of those very important moments where if he somehow misses this, it gets ugly very fast. But he's going to drop a scan too. Really does not want to risk it. I mean, there's so much airspace. We talk about how good it is for Terran, keeping like 10 medevacs there.
Don't sell that scan to me, Nate.
If he misses the Prism, you miss the Prism there? No, you can't.
I mean, you have like 20
that'd be an inexcusable. It would be inexcusable
to miss. Yeah, I agree. It would be inexcusable if you go looking for the Prism and you miss it. Like, I think the scan is completely unnecessary there.
Maybe. Scans are free. I don't mind.
They're not free. What?
Use them if you got them, man. He's maxed out. He's got plenty of money. You can drop a scan looking for a Prism. I don't mind it.
I like this scan. It's kind of, you know, gathering information that it wouldn't otherwise. Information that would be costly. It would at least cost you a unit or a couple to see exactly what's going on and where and what the unit composition is and whatnot. So Spirit using scans to try to crawl on forward. Good EMPs as a result. Oh, that looked like a very long Disruptor Nova to me.
Yeah, I was looking for. Would have loved to hit the Ghost there, but this is where you start to get suffocated by this type of army, and it goes a little more towards the conversation we had in game 1, where now that the Terran has the Liberators with range and the +2, you're not going to be able to just blink Stalkers into +2 Liberators. That doesn't work. Maybe if you can get them from behind, you can do some work. You can see here that range obviously just makes things frustrating and difficult across the board. So you can try to go around it with some of the harass units. You can't engage into this. So Hellraiser has a bit of a clock to race against. He does have a huge harass force with those DTs and Zealots that we saw. He's going to bring the Stalkers over with this too. So he says, okay, maybe I'll smash this command center, smash through the 3rd base, and just keep trying to trade. But that's, you know, this. I do believe this might be one of those scenarios where we talk about base trading Terrans not being as good of a move. Blinks up into the Liberators. +2's not done just yet, so trades decently there. And Spirit's going to have to send the air units home.
Yeah,
he's going to load up.
I don't know
how
much I like that though. Like, especially against the Stalker force, I feel like the ground army should have been the ones to come first. If anything, should have been coming here. So these Liberators are going to get blinked on. A lot of them are going to get taken down kind of for free, but with the rest of the ground army coming, maybe that's enough for Spirit to get the cleanup.
Jumping Jacks.
Vikings landing is beautiful.
Jumping Jacks on the Vikings. They do that bonus, almost double damage on the ground against the Stalkers too. Cancels +3 at 99%.
Nice.
Yeah, Spirit's doing a really good job this game. I mean, he's just been running away with it. I don't think the infrastructure was there for Hellraiser to be ready for the ranged Liberator transition, but once you get out and you've got like 5 or 6 advanced ballistics Liberators, we've seen over the years Protoss use stuff like you either have to try and dive into it if you have an economic advantage, which he didn't really have as Spirit's taken bases all over, or you go, something like Tempest or other air units. But I don't think Hellraiser had the money to try and sit back and build a bunch of Stargates and Tempest to deal with these Liberators at any point.
Yeah, all of the Liberators, however, are facing the front, so this backstab move from Hellraiser is one of the better things that he can do. He is a lot of supply behind, and all of the Liberators turn at once. I'm not even sure how he sieged so fast. Must be the rapid fire key or something, but it's gonna work out well for Spirit, who is now sieging onto this. But hey, the very good zoning from the Disruptors is gonna make it so that a lot of the bio does not partake here as they go after a Nexus instead. That is economic damage done, and now with still enough to kind of collapse onto this, Hellraiser will be forced to tap out, and Spirit will close the match with a 2-1 score.
I think wasn't that game 2, kids? So I think we got a game 3 now, right?
No way, really? Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's right. Raise your daughters, ladies and gentlemen. Things are getting interesting over here at the DreamHack Masters. So we had the Warp Gateless Carrier +3 attack rush in game 1 from Hellraiser, and we didn't really have the flexibility out of Spirit to deal with it, right? Going to game 2, the ranged Liberators come out. The flexibility isn't really there to deal with those, so he tries to go all over the map, but Spirit was just, I think, a little bit too on top of things defensively. Marines and Marauders are obviously going to be phenomenal in low numbers against gateway units, so was hard-pressed to find some damage in that later stage.
Yeah, he had traded very well also leading up to that point. On offense, he did really well to reset a lot of the tech counts of Hellraiser and just kind of do well with the siege with the bio and the ghosts earlier in the game. Hellraiser was a little bit late to his tech as well. So he was definitely in a difficult position going into that later game. I don't blame him for kind of ignoring the ranged Liberators and trying to do something on the other side of the map. Not sure if recall could have been a good call or if it wasn't available or something of the likes, but it ends up being Spirit's game to take. And yeah, we're now headed into Oxide. So
textbook PvP though, right? Out of Spirit. Nothing there is super crazy. He respected the opening a lot more in that second game, but as soon as he realized that it was a normal game, Marauder production went back into the flow, was going big for the drops on the northwest. The Widow Mines we were talking about caused a lot of distraction and chaos. Even if he wasn't getting those juicy 10 kill mine shots, he's still forcing everything to run back over there. He has to build the cannons to get the detection unless he wants to leave observers everywhere. And once the Terran player has the momentum and starts making you go all over the place to defend, that's usually when, you know, we start to see the collapse on the Protoss side of things. So Spirit looking good in the straight up macro game. Does make me wonder, Cats, do we get something funky coming in then for game 3 out of Hellraiser?
I kind of hope so, but at the same time, it's like you said, textbook. It's gonna be Oxide. I think that this is a pretty. I like it for Terran for the most part. I like it for tank pushes and the likes. I'm not sure if Spirit has that in his bag of tricks. I'm sure he does. I'm not sure that he's gonna be like Oxide. I'm gonna make some tanks, but I would love to see something like a tank push on this map, trying to utilize the features of it, or Liberators also, or tanks and Liberators, like we saw Marine Lord employed together earlier today. So we'll see what Spirit has in store. I'll be surprised if Hellraiser does something different than the standard like blink openers or something on this map. And spawning in the top right hand side, the man that I am hoping for a surprise from, it is Hellraiser.
And his opponent in the bottom left, the red Terran player, he is Spirit. Honorable mention, by the way, losing +3 attack.
Yeah,
naturally contributes pretty heavily when you're trying to burst down units like those Liberators. And I do love to see heavy Liberator usage in TVP. I know that a lot of the conversations people have had about strategies, meta, where things have been going. Obviously, Liberators are expensive, take a little bit longer to build than the Vikings. And a lot of folks do like Vikings against Colossi. But I do love to see a good setup where you get a bunch of those Liberators. And people talk about, oh, well, you know, then how do you deal with those big units? Manually target firing Liberators anti-ground against Colossi is something that you can do. And it's actually really nasty when they step in that zone and they think it's only going to hit their stalkers. And they're like, well, my Colossi will kill all the bio anyway. And you're like, no. So there's still quite a few cool, interesting ways you can try to play that late stage out. Because he could have also just, tried to commit to something else or just play mass bio and dance around disruptors, but Spirit liking his more technical composition, and it's refreshing to see, at least for me.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, when you're talking about like those big units trading shots with Liberators. Liberators are always going to have the great advantage of having so much damage that they overkill most units, or overkill over 2 shots or something like that. But when you have as much HP as a Colossus or an Ultra or something like that, then you're basically going to take the full brunt of the damage of the Liberator every time. So I do love that. I think that's a very employable, very strong tactic.
Yeah, so there's the Stargate.
Ooh.
It is in an aggressive position.
Yeah.
The Marine sees it though. Spirit's kind of been on top of this with the scouting. He's been looking around. We talked about this earlier. Even off the Reaper Expand game, he made sure to send an SCV around the side of Romanticide. So this is the kind of heads up stuff that I think Spirit's just been doing a generally good job with. Now, is he
Void Race.
Is he going to come out and see where this is going to be set up though? Because this is quite cheeky. Sometimes you'll try to do it close to the Stargate, but he's going to build it right at the bottom of that ramp, and he's saying you're not even going to be allowed to leave your base. You know, it's not like I'm building outside your main cliff or something like that. I'm going to build on your freaking ramp, bruh.
Yeah, Spirit seems to be aware, already dropping the second bunker. The probe actually will fall. That's actually huge, and the first battery actually will get cancelled as well. The second one under heavy fire. Very intelligent gameplay here from Spirit, leveraging the HP of each of his Marines to the max and then loading them into the bunker. So are they red? Who cares? But there's another now. There's another probe here joining the fray, and that's going to be extremely important for Hellraiser. Because if there wasn't the second probe that's just lights out, it's going to be Stalkers and Void Race looking to poke, and those batteries kind of looking to provide a backbone for Hellraiser. But this should all be up to Sol. Can Sol manage this? It's up to him. He knows from the very beginning he couldn't have scouted this any earlier. So if he has practiced against this, he should have this in the bag.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation to be put in. There's a lot of different ways to react to this kind of thing. Some people will say Vikings, but very flimsy, low hit points, easy to kind of focus down. Cyclones at Magfield, I actually think that this is the best option. Once you get 2 Cyclones, actually I'll say this, even 1 Cyclone with Magfield does barely out DPS the shield battery, but it's not really enough to like get through all the shields. It's kind of like staggered. But if you get 2 Cyclones and you can have both Cyclones focus onto 1 Void Ray or 1 Stalker, shield battery overcharged or not isn't going to do diddly to protect your unit. So you'll still burst it down in about 2 to 3 seconds. So Magfield's definitely the play. The worst mistake he could make would be losing a Cyclone. It's totally fine to trade out SCVs here. As long as he can hold this door until he gets those power units ready to rock and roll, he should be okay. So yeah, let the workers die. Your opponent's on 1 base. You have 2 orbitals. You have mules. He could be at 12 SCVs. I think that it'd still be a very winnable position if he's able to break this front off of him.
Yeah, so far so good. Certainly for Spirit, this is looking very good. A couple of Stalkers, or at least 1, will falter. And look at the also the amount of energy on those shield batteries is pretty much non-existent. The last shield battery also gets drained out of all of its energy, and now Hellraiser has to kind of wait for some of that energy to replenish. And I mean, they don't even have enough energy to shield to heal those Stalkers. It might even be a good idea to have put those Stalkers way in the back so that they regenerate their shields by themselves and don't waste the energy of those shield batteries if they're not going to be coming into play anytime soon, because this is getting increasingly more difficult for Hellraiser. I mean, those shield batteries are now replenishing a little bit of their shields, and that is the only reason that we haven't seen him poke back up, right?
Yeah, and this is exactly the way to do it with the Cyclones. So the harass on the barracks kind of sucks. I think you need to keep other units away from the Cyclones because they get the pathing blocked relatively easily. But as long as the Cyclones are prioritizing where the Void Rays want to be, he can always just try to lock on all 3 onto 1 is going to be the move for that burst damage that I was talking about. But he's got the siege tank now, and yeah, honestly, Spirit should not lose this game anymore. He should be pretty rock solid from this point forward. 2 full bunkers of Marines, 3 Magfield Cyclones, a siege tank, and what, 2, 4, 6, 8, yeah, roughly SCVs wrapped around that bunker. Going to make it very hard to pop, and he will get it, but the Cyclones come forward. He's got down 1 of the Void Rays, starting to really push it, wow. But good repair on that second bunker, keeps the defense alive and loses a lot to make that push. But there's still a few Cyclones here, so the range trying to bully those Marines is not something that he, I think, can get away with very easily.
Yeah, I also love the angling of the Cyclones for the most part because, like you said, they are easy to kind of get trapped in between the debris and between your own units. So they're kind of always poking from the sides, never from the center where they have to retreat into
GG.
those structures. And yeah, Spirit has done it.